They say confession is where truth lives. My parish called it a room of mercy. Some nights, I called it a hospital with the lights off. The line outside my booth grew after layoffs, divorces, small crimes that wore Sunday clothes. I learned their voices, the way guilt trembles in a throat. One winter, I began changing the words, just a little. I told a thief God understood necessity. I told a husband that loneliness speaks before love does. Their shoulders fell, they breathed, and I tasted relief like wine. Then a man returned, same sin, same smile. "Father," he whispered, "you said heaven approved." Somewhere between his breath and my silence, I heard the lock turn on my own soul. If there was a first lie, I can name it. If there was a last one, you'll decide. They called me Father Andrés, but before I wore the collar, I was just a boy who couldn't stand silence. I grew up in Granada, where bells rang louder than conscience. My mother scrubbed marble floors in the cathedral, her knees red from devotion. My father, gone before I could remember, left only a photograph of a man in uniform and a rosary with one missing bead. Every night she whispered the same prayer, "May you serve God better than the men before you." I believed her. No, I needed to. At 24, I entered seminary. They taught us that truth was light, and we were its lamps. But no one said the light burns, that faith can blister. When the bishop placed his hand on my head, I felt not holiness, but the weight of a promise I didn't understand. My first parish was small, too small for ambition, too poor for miracles. A forgotten village outside Toledo, cracked houses, an old church that smelled of damp stone and dying flowers. Every Sunday I faced fewer faces. Every Monday I counted the coins that didn't cover the candles. The world was moving, but our prayers stayed still. Then came the confessions. A woman whose husband beat her but still knelt beside him in Mass. A shopkeeper who lied about his taxes because his son needed shoes. A boy, 12, who said he hated his drunk father and wished him dead. I told them all the same thing. God forgives. But something in their eyes, relief, hunger, dependence, started to feel like power. Each word of mercy they believed made me less certain of my own. The turning point came on a winter night, rain like knives, the booth cold enough to bite. An old man came in. His breath smelled of medicine and loneliness. He confessed stealing bread. Twice. He said, "Father, I was hungry." I should have reminded him that theft is sin, that repentance needs truth. Instead, I said, "Hunger is not a sin. God knows the weight of an empty stomach." He cried. He thanked me. He called me merciful. I didn't correct him. When I walked home that night, the wind tore my cassock, and I realized something strange. I didn't feel guilt. I felt alive, as if I'd rewritten the rules. Soon word spread. People started calling my booth the door that opens. Farmers, teenagers, adulterers, they all came. The pews filled again. The diocese noticed. "Father Andrés," they said, "your parish thrives. You've reignited faith." Faith? I wasn't sure what I'd ignited, but it burned beautifully. Each confession became a stage, each absolution, applause. And when the lights dimmed, when I closed that wooden door behind me, I'd hear my own heart whisper, "You did good." But good is a fragile word, and I was already bending it. Then came him, the man who would break me. But not yet. Not before I learned how easy it is to mistake love for forgiveness, and forgiveness for control. It began with a headline: Spain's churches empty faster than ever. A journalist wrote that priests were relics in robes. I read it twice, then again. They were talking about us, about me. My church stood like a survivor of faith's extinction, still breathing, but barely. And I thought, if mercy fills the pews, maybe God wants mercy louder. I started changing my sermons: less judgment, more comfort; less Latin, more laughter. People clapped in a church, and I told myself applause is just another kind of prayer. But it wasn't prayer. It was approval, and I was addicted. Soon confession turned into therapy. A man confessed adultery. I told him love is complicated. A woman said she envied her sister. I told her envy is proof of longing. I rewrote sin into sentiment. They left smiling. The bishop smiled too. Whatever you're doing, Father, keep doing it. I did. There's a phrase in the Catechism: mercy without truth is deceit. I used to believe it. Then one night I tore the page from my book. The real pressure came later, when Rome sent a new directive: revitalize parish engagement. They wanted modern priests, accessible, understanding, merciful. I became their model. TV crews came. Cameras flashed as I blessed the crowd. They called me the People's Priest, a title that tasted like heaven and rotted like pride. But between interviews and incense, I started to hear another voice, not divine, familiar, mine. You're saving them, it said. You're doing what God can't, making forgiveness easy. I began to believe it. Then, in the quiet after Mass, a boy approached me, 16, pale, trembling. He said, "Father, I've sinned with another boy." His eyes begged me not for absolution, but for permission to exist. And I said it, the line that split me open. God doesn't condemn love, only cruelty. He cried. He hugged me. And for the first time, I wondered if I'd spoken as a priest or as a man afraid of breaking someone else's heart. That night I stared at the crucifix above my bed. Christ's eyes seemed to ask a question I couldn't answer. Who are you saving, Andrés? Them or yourself? I turned away. The next morning, the confessional line doubled. Word had spread, and in that growing crowd, I saw the man who would return, the man whose sin I'd already softened once, waiting, smiling, ready to confess again. Mercy had become temptation, and I, its willing instrument. Forgiveness became my theater. Each Sunday I stood at the altar like a man conducting grace, not granting it, performing it. People came from other towns just to hear me speak. I changed the liturgy's rhythm, slowed the prayers, let silence linger like perfume. I'd watch their faces soften, their lips tremble, their eyes glisten as if heaven had lowered itself into my voice. That power, subtle, invisible, wrapped around me like incense smoke. I stopped fearing God. I started fearing silence. The man came again, the thief, the one who stole bread. Only this time it wasn't bread, it was money, from a neighbor's till. "Father," he said, "you told me once that hunger isn't a sin." I was hungry again, for more. His words slid into me like a blade of truth. He smiled when I forgave him. He left lighter, and I felt dizzy. Somewhere deep inside, something whispered, "This is what you've built. Mercy without consequence." But I silenced it, because the crowd outside the booth was still waiting, because they believed in me more than they believed in God. Soon, confessions bled into conversations. I stayed after Mass, poured wine, listened to lives unravel. They told me things they'd never told spouses, therapists, or police. And every time I told them what they wanted to hear. You're only human. God understands. Pain is its own prayer. It felt holy, intoxicating. The church became a sanctuary for sinners who no longer feared sin, and I became the high priest of comfort. One night, after too much communion wine, I wrote in my journal, "Perhaps truth itself is a burden God never meant for us to carry. Perhaps he needs liars like me to make his mercy believable." I woke to those words and didn't erase them. Instead, I underlined them. Twice. The media loved me. "Father of the Lost," one headline read. They called me to Madrid for interviews, asked about my modern mercy. I said, "People don't need punishment. They need tenderness." The applause drowned my hesitation, and when the lights hit my face, I remembered the same thrill, the one from my first sin of mercy, that same delicious burn. I wasn't saving souls anymore. I was saving my relevance. Then came the letters, dozens of them, people thanking me for freeing them from guilt. A man wrote, "I left my wife, but thanks to your words, I feel peace." A woman wrote, "Your absolution helped me stop confessing altogether." Every line felt like both blessing and curse, and I couldn't tell the difference anymore. Until one evening, candlelight trembling, rain pressing against the stained glass. The thief returned once more. Same voice, same calm, but this time his sin was darker. He said, "Father, I hurt someone. She wouldn't give me the money, and I pushed her, hard. She fell." The booth went silent, only his breathing, and mine. He whispered, "I came because you said God forgives necessity." In that moment, every lie I'd ever told gathered around me, whispering, "We did this." I wanted to scream, to tell him I was wrong, that mercy has limits, that it was me, not heaven, who'd blessed his hunger. But I couldn't. Because if I took it back, I'd have to take back everything. So I said nothing. He left with a smile, and I sat there, trembling, waiting for a sound I feared more than hell itself. A knock. It came the next morning. The police. They were looking for him, and I realized, for the first time, that my words had drawn blood. The crowd outside the church still came. They still lined up for forgiveness, but all I saw now were ghosts, faces shaped by my lies, souls carrying absolutions that might damn them. And when I stepped into the pulpit, I heard my own voice echo back like a stranger's. That night, I tore the confessional curtain down. I stared at the empty booth, my stage, my cage, and I whispered, "If God can forgive me for this, then he must be death." The story broke before dawn. Local priest's parishioner arrested in fatal robbery. My name wasn't printed yet, but his was, and everyone knew where he confessed. By morning, the pews were empty. By evening, the police arrived again, not with cuffs, but with questions. When did he last speak to you, Father? Did he seem remorseful? Did you advise him? Advise, as if mercy were counsel, as if words could kill. I told them what they needed to hear, that I listened, that I prayed, that I offered only faith. But every sentence I spoke felt like glass breaking inside my mouth, because I knew the truth. He didn't believe God forgave him. He believed I did. That night, I tried to pray, but the words, "Our Father, who art in heaven," fell apart halfway through. The air felt too heavy for grace. When I looked up, the crucifix above the altar seemed to have turned away. I knelt. I waited. Silence. Long, punishing silence. And then, a thought. What if God stopped listening the moment I started speaking for him? The bishop called me to Madrid. His face was calm, administrative, surgical. "We've received complaints. You've deviated from doctrine. Too lenient, too emotional." He used the word dangerous. He said there would be an internal review. Until then, you are relieved of your parish duties. Relieved, as if this were mercy for me. I left the room and vomited in the hallway. The media turned fast. The same cameras that once adored me now lingered on my silence. Headlines shifted tone. Father of the lost or the misled? Missy gone wrong, mercy gone wrong. The priest who forgave too much. I stopped reading, stopped eating, stopped answering calls. I locked myself inside the rectory and listened to the building breathe. Days blurred. Letters piled up on the doorstep, half pleading for my return, half condemning me to hell. One line kept echoing in my head. You taught us sin had no consequence. Now look. On the 7th night, I went back to the confessional, not to forgive, to remember. The wood smelled of sweat, salt, and ghosts. I sat down where I'd sat 100 times before. I whispered, "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned." No one answered. So I answered myself. You lied in God's name. You confused mercy with vanity. You built faith out of comfort and called it love. Each sentence struck like thunder. I wept, not softly, but the way a man breaks when he realizes no one's left to witness his ruin. The next morning, the door to the church was found open, candles still burning. No mass, no priest. They said I'd gone to a monastery. They said I'd disappeared. Some said I'd lost my mind. Maybe all of them were right, because when you spend too long pretending to be God, you forget what it means to be human. And still, in the silence of exile, I kept hearing it, the thief's voice, that trembling, grateful tone. You said heaven approved. Heaven hadn't, only I had. And now that approval had turned into the longest punishment imaginable, to live knowing I'd turned forgiveness into sin. They sent me to a monastery in the mountains, a place where even the wind seemed to whisper prayers I no longer remembered. No clocks, no phones, only bells marking hours that felt like years. The monks didn't ask questions, they just watched, the way one watches a man learning how to breathe again. I tried to sleep, but every night I saw his face, the thief's smile, the flash of his confession, and the invisible weight of the woman he'd pushed. I imagined her falling, over and over, as if replaying her death could make me more worthy of the guilt. One morning, I was told to tend the vineyard. The earth was dry, the vines withered. The abbot said, "The soil remembers what we feed it." So does the soul. I didn't answer. I just dug, hands bleeding, sun burning, body breaking. It felt honest, the first honesty in years. Weeks passed. The silence began to carve me open. Without sermons, there were no lies. Without listeners, there was no applause. Without power, there was pain. But pain, I discovered, is a kind of truth, And truth, once you touch it again, burns worse than fire. One night, unable to sleep, I went to the chapel. No candles, only the moon through the glass. I knelt before the cross, and for the first time since I'd fallen, I spoke without fear of being heard. Lord, I wanted to help them. I wanted to heal what I couldn't fix, but I loved the sound of my own mercy more than yours. My voice cracked. I lied in your name. I told them heaven was easy because I couldn't bear to see their pain. And now, every time I close my eyes, I see her body. I see his face. I see you, silent, waiting for a truth I'm still afraid to say. I paused, and then I said it. I don't know if I believe anymore. The chapel stayed quiet, but somewhere inside that silence, something shifted. Not forgiveness, not peace, just space. As if God had stepped back, not in anger, but to let me stand on my own again. The next morning I found the abbot waiting. He looked at me, not as a sinner, not as a priest, just as a man. He said, "You've been confessing to walls, Andrés. Maybe it's time to confess to life." He handed me a letter. The diocese had closed my parish permanently. No return, no reinstatement. My old life, gone. But for the first time, I didn't feel condemned. I felt empty, but real. That night, I wrote in my journal, "Mercy is not a lie. It is a mirror," and I broke it trying to see myself inside it. When I closed the book, I felt the faintest pulse of something familiar. Not faith, but its ghost. A year passed before I spoke my name aloud again. Father Andrés. It sounded foreign, like a relic from another life. At the monastery, they called me simply Andrés. No collar, no title. Just the man who worked the soil and prayed without knowing if anyone was listening. But slowly, in the rhythm of ordinary labor, pruning vines, washing floors, mending robes, I began to hear something softer than forgiveness. Patience. One afternoon, the abbot approached me with a letter. It was from Madrid, from the brother of the woman who had died. I stared at the envelope for hours before opening it. Inside were only a few lines. "She used to light candles in your church every Sunday. She said you made her believe God saw the small people. I don't know if I forgive you, but I know she would." The paper shook in my hands. My throat closed, and for the first time, I didn't try to justify anything. I just whispered, "Thank you." That night I returned to the chapel. Same moonlight, same silence. But I wasn't there to beg this time. I was there to listen. And in that stillness I finally understood. Faith isn't certainty. It's the decision to stand in the dark and keep your eyes open.
Months later, the abbot asked if I'd like to travel to nearby villages to help rebuild their old chapels. Manual work. No sermons, no confessions. Just walls, bricks, dust. I said yes. The first time I entered a chapel again, my hands trembled. The smell of stone and wax brought everything back. The applause, the lies, the echoes of forgiveness I didn't own. But then I saw a child sweeping the floor, humming to herself. A sound so innocent it broke the last of my defenses. I realized that faith had never belonged to me. It had always lived in moments like that. A child cleaning a church no one visited. A brother writing a letter he didn't have to send. A priest finally shutting his mouth long enough to hear what silence sounds like when it forgives. I stayed to rebuild the chapel, not as penance, as purpose. Every stone I lifted, Every nail I drove felt like a prayer written in sweat instead of words. And when the roof was done, when sunlight poured through the new glass, I didn't bless the building. I just sat down, and for the first time in years, felt small again, and safe in that smallness. Sometimes visitors ask who I was before this life. I tell them, a man who tried to be God and failed beautifully. They laugh, unsure if it's a joke. I don't correct them. There's no need, because the truth isn't in the telling anymore. It's in the pause that follows. Now, when I wake before dawn, I still hear the bells. They sound softer here, less like commands, more like reminders. Each toll says the same thing. Begin again. Begin again. And maybe that's all redemption ever was, not erasing the sin, but choosing to live with it honestly, day after day, with no applause, no spotlight, only the quiet rhythm of a heart learning how to pray again. Epilogue. Somewhere in Spain, a small chapel stands. White walls, open doors, the scent of grapes from nearby vineyards drifting through. No priest preaches there, only a man sweeping the floor, humming softly, as if God were still listening.